Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I've worked Firewatch out of Deadman Lookout for 4 seasons now. That's up in the Roosevelt National Forest, just northwest of Fort Collins, Colorado. 38 feet up a metal tower bolted into the rock on a ridge above the Poudre Canyon. My job's simple in theory. Scan the forest, track the weather, report anything suspicious. Lightning strikes, illegal burns, smoke columns, campers where they shouldn't be. They trained me to be the first set of eyes between a flicker and a wildfire. On most days, the only thing burning is the black coffee on the single burner stove, and even that takes effort. I'm not a ranger. I don't carry a badge or a gun. I was a seasonal tech for the Forest Service, contracted through a wildfire mitigation grant, though technically my official title is Lookout Observer. Fancy words for a guy living in a shack on stilts with a pair of binoculars and a radio that still uses call signs. I like the quiet. You wake up with the sun, eat out of cans, and log weather every 3 hours. It's lonely, but it clears the noise out of your head. I'm 37, single, ex-paramedic, left the ambulance behind after too many nights full of blood and headlights, swapped sirens for pine wind. I thought I'd found peace up here. Day 1 of the outbreak, or whatever you want to call it, started like most others. A slow roll into sunlight through the windows, the tower swaying just enough in the morning wind to make the guidelines hum. I remember thinking the scanner was dead because the frequency was so clean. No chatter, no static, nothing. Just the creaking of steel joints and the usual birdsong. I rolled out of the cot, scratched my jaw, and stepped barefoot onto the cold plank floor. First task was routine. Log the weather. Winds light from the southwest. Scattered cloud cover. 63 degrees. Visibility good. I filled in the log sheet and jotted clear start, no smoke. Not dramatic, but that's how most of my mornings went. The forest smelled right. Dry pine, sun-warmed dirt, and that faint tang of sap in the breeze. I set water to boil on the camp stove and took my usual lap around the catwalk. Binoculars up. Sweep east across the ridge, north over the draw, down the switchbacks. Campgrounds were quiet. Nothing in the upper clearings. A hawk floated above the old firebreak like it was stitched into the sky. The road down to Silver Creek Campground looked empty. One tent flap flapping in the wind. Nobody visible. Standard stuff. I made a note of it, not because it was strange, just because I liked writing down when things stayed still. A tower log with nothing in it meant the world hadn't tried to burn down yet. Just before noon, the scanner chirped once and hissed into life. A voice from the ranger station down in Poudre Valley. Clipped, static heavy. I only caught half of it. Something about disturbance. Silver Creek. Advise patrol. Then the carrier tone. I gave it a minute, keyed my mic and checked in. Deadman Lookout to base. Copy transmission. Nothing. Just open air and silence thick enough to hear the hiss of the stove behind me. Probably just bad line of sight again, I told myself. The repeater up near Pingree Park likes to cut out. I figured the dispatcher had stepped away from the desk. It was easier to believe that than anything worse. You have to tell yourself small lies like that when you're alone. It keeps your hands from shaking before lunch. I swept the valley again. Looked at that tent near the big Ponderosa. Still standing, wind tugging at the guy lines. No movement. It was well past checkout time. No footprints on the access path. I stared until my eyes hurt. A squirrel ran out from under the fire ring and back again. I wrote it off. Some folks leave tents up when they go fishing. I logged, tent still pitched, no visible campers, then made lunch. Dented can of chili, no heat. I was getting low on propane. I told myself I'd ask the supply driver to bring more when he came up tomorrow. Water too. Maybe a new headlamp. Then I caught myself writing, afternoon dry, no smoke, campers inactive, unclear why. That last bit stayed with me longer than it should have. I signed the log beneath it anyway. Put your name next to your doubt. Feels more honest that way. Things started to feel off just before dusk. The kind of thing you only notice because everything else is too quiet. It wasn't a sound so much as the shape of sound. Something low, distant, shaped like a crowd before a football game. Not cheering, not talking, just a layered murmur riding the wind. Could have been static off a car stereo. Could have been birds settling wrong. I leaned on the east railing with the binoculars and scanned the drainages, slow and steady. Nothing. No vehicles on the spur, no hikers, no smoke. The shadows started to stretch long across the brush. That's usually when I pack it in, radio check one last time, eat dinner, maybe read. I waited. The station didn't check in. Then came the voice. Not a ranger, not even a park worker. It was someone raw, male, maybe early 30s, breathless. Came in over the public channel, like he'd fumbled the mic on a handheld unit. Something bit her, he said. Then the clatter of plastic and wind. A pause. Then he came back on, quieter. Apologized for swearing over emergency frequencies. Gave a marker. Ridge trail near mile 7. Said his girlfriend or wife had a leg wound and wasn't acting right. Kept asking where she was, even while looking at him. I asked if he could see the fire tower. He couldn't. Said trees were too thick. I swept the ridge with the binoculars until stars jumped in the lens. Nothing. Not a headlamp, not a shadow. I told him to head south toward the ranger station. Keep low, keep quiet. Don't stop unless absolutely necessary. I gave him bearings and rough trail times. Told him to keep the radio open and his flashlight off. He said thank you. I said I'd stay on the air until I couldn't hear him anymore. I heard him for maybe 10 minutes. Short bursts, breathing, snapping brush. At one point he muttered her name. Claire, I think. After that, nothing. Not a scream. Not a word. Just the static hum of dead air and the rustle of my own jacket sleeve when I leaned too hard on the counter. The stars felt sharper than usual that night. I didn't log anything else. Just stared out the window, the radio cradled against my chest, waiting for a voice that never came back. Whatever bit her, whatever was out there near Silver Creek. That was the first moment I knew this season wasn't going to end with fire. Something else was creeping in, and I was too high up to touch it, but not high enough to avoid it. Morning day 2, I set coffee on the stove and couldn't drink it. Bitter sat wrong. I climbed the roof for a better angle and started a slow circle. West, over the old burn scar, was clear. South, a faint smudge at the edge of town, like breath on glass. I put a finger on the map and wrote, possible column, far south. When the sun hit the antenna, the station tried again. I caught the tail of a transmission and a small word that dropped like a nail into the floor. Quarantine. Then the station cut off again. Around noon, the first infected I ever saw stepped out of the tree line below my tower. He moved like he had forgotten where his joints were. He wobbled, then straightened, then pitched, like he was walking on a deck in swell. His shirt was soaked and stiff, not with the right kind of dirt. He had a stripe of something dark from jaw to collarbone that the flies liked. He tilted his head too far back, like the spine didn't know the limit anymore. I said the man's position aloud, and wrote it down, and watched the seconds crawl while he walked toward the base of my ladder, then past it, then away as if he'd never seen the structure at all. He stopped at a stump and patted it. I wanted to climb down and ask if he needed help. I did not. I spent the afternoon setting rules. No ladder unless the ground is clear. No noise after dusk. Kettle off the flame the second it boils. Keep the hammer and the climbing axe within arm's reach, one on each side of the hatch. Keep the coil of rope on the hook above the door. The bear spray can rattled empty in my hand. I'd burned it last week on a black shape at twilight that turned out to be a stump. Only gun I had, a beat-up .357, was sitting in the glove box of my truck back at the Poudre Park pullout. Left it there at the start of the season, thinking I wouldn't need it. Our district lead never banned personal firearms outright, but he asked civilian lookouts to keep them off the tower after an ugly run-in with visitors last summer, and I said I would. Smart then, feels foolish now. I inventoried food and water and found less than I liked. 4 flats of cans, 2 wheat loaves sealed like bricks, a big peanut butter jar, iodine for the roof barrel, and the usual junk, fuel for the generator for a week if I was stingy. My biggest assets were the sun and height. Height only helps if the ground can't climb. I looked at the ladder and thought about saws. Late day 3, the wind changed. Smoke rolled in from the south where the highway runs along the river. The scanner spilled fragments like dropped glass. Words like containment, civilians, unauthorized roadblock. I heard a ranger's call sign I knew, Maya at the West District, and my hand went to the mic before the rest of me did. North Peak lookout to West District copy. Her answer came ragged. North Peak, we're closing sights. If you're up there, stay up there. Don't come down to meet anyone you don't recognize. If you hear kids, keep the hatch closed. My mouth tried to ask why kids. The transmission cut. That evening, a buck wandered under the tower, snorting, ears like satellites. It stood too long, staring north as if expecting something to crest the slope. When it broke, it didn't walk. It launched. White tail, 3 bounds, gone. The infected do not hunt like cats or coyotes. They do something in between. I learned that on day 4. A pair of them came out of the forest together. One moved slow, legs stiff. One came on all fours for a few steps and then stood. They grabbed at the same tree trunk and then let go like kids missing a high five. They could smell the rooftop barrel. When the wind shifted, both heads turned to me in a neat motion and stopped. I pulled the hatch tight and slid the bolt. I rationed water and food and wrote smaller in the log to make the pages last. The supply truck didn't come. The road into the park would have taken a man through 3 towns and 2 bridges, and the scanner said both bridges were blocked by incidents. That word kept showing up. I started a second notebook, not for quotes, just for how the infected moved. They lost speed on slopes. They lost interest when the sound stopped. They grouped like loose sheep. A single shout could turn the flock. That makes them easy to map and hard to avoid. On day 6, I found a minivan parked sideways at the trailhead through the binoculars. Doors open, a child's jacket on the ground. I kept the glass on the van for an hour. When the sun swung and the glare shifted, I saw a man under the car, feet sticking out, ankles crossed like he had decided to work under there while the world burned. I called the station again. My voice sounded like gravel in a tin cup. No answer. I tried the repeater and asked if anyone was receiving North Peak. I got a voice from far off. Not a ranger, a woman. Calm tone, sick, sweet word choice. She asked if my tower had a ladder. I set the mic down and let the carrier run until the generator tripped and the light died. The nights dragged the country back to animals. Coyotes sang from the ridges and stopped mid-phrase. Owls quit calling. The infected didn't moan like movies. They made little sounds you could miss. Huffing, throat clicks, teeth on bark. I woke from short sleep to the faint tap of something at the base of the tower. Regular and unhurried, like a metronome. I counted. It went on for 20 minutes and then stopped. When I checked the ladder at dawn, I found a smear at shoulder height where hands had reached and slipped. The wood had dents. Not from claws, from knuckles. Day 8, I saw the first fire column take a forest road. It came up out of the valley in a fast run, like a fuse had lit the world. Someone tried to drive out with a trailer and left the trailer jackknifed across the switchback. The flames hit the dry grass and walked the ditch in a straight line. It didn't matter. The infected stepped around fire the way a drunk steps around a puddle. Fire does not scare what does not plan for tomorrow. The second lookout to the north, a little stump of a tower on a rocky knob, still had a person at it on day 9. At dusk, a light blinked twice from that direction. Not a headlamp, something deliberate. I flashed my mirror twice back and then 3 times. The old code we use when the radios act up. The light on the knob blinked 3 times and then held steady for a slow count of 5. Then went dark. I didn't sleep. I lay on the floor with my boots on, hatch cracked to listen, rope coiled by my hand. When dawn bled in, I swept the ridge and saw smoke rising from the knob site. No light. The tower was a black tooth. Day 10, I walked the catwalk and told myself I would not cut the ladder. I told myself I would not lock myself into a wooden box with one exit and no way to reach water. Then I looked at the new dents on the ladder and the fresh prints on the dirt. I took the saw from the toolbox and cut away the bottom 2 rungs. I shaved the cut ends smooth and kicked the rungs into the brush. Now anyone on the ground would have to jump and catch. I can climb the rest by dropping the rope and using a Prusik loop like we practice. It makes the legs burn, better than hands on the hatch when I sleep. Around midday, a voice cracked the scanner open like someone had smashed it. National Guard to all units. River corridor is closed. Shelter in place. If you are in elevated positions, remain there. Do not open doors to unknown persons. Do not render aid to unknown persons. The words were fast, read from a sheet, the kind of message that asks you to give up being neighbors. I set the mic down and stared at my hands until the generator sputtered. I poured another pint from the jerry can, and the fuel smell reminded me of boats with my father on the lake, and I had to turn away quick. The infected learned my tower's smell by day 11. They came more often, in 2s and 3s, sometimes singly, like wanderers bumped off their path by scent. They stood at the base and looked up. That's the part that bothered me. Not the arms, not the stains, not the way one of them scraped its head against the ladder like a deer rubs velvet off a new rack. The faces, the quiet stare up into the rafters, as if memory ran a finger across the grain and stopped at a splinter. The wind pushed a coil of my rope against the wall, tapping it, and one of them raised his head quicker than a dog to a whistle. I slid the coil into the storage box and locked it. On day 12, I caught the sound of an engine down in the basin. I grabbed the glass and found a pickup crawling along the dirt road, slow and quiet, hood dented, a white sheet tied to the antenna. People in the bed sat low with blankets over heads. The truck came up to the gate and stopped. A group came out of the brush from both sides and closed like a zipper. The truck backed into the ditch. I told the mic what I saw so I wouldn't forget it right. By the time my voice ran out, the truck did too. The group moved around it as neat as ants. I wanted to look away and didn't. I tracked faces, walks, the sound the tires made when the sidewalls let go. I wrote what I saw with the same hand I use for weather. The roof barrel ran low by day 13. Roof water tastes like dust and pine, but iodine makes it drinkable. And the iodine bottle stood there like a little glass prayer. I checked the bolt cutters twice that day. There's a weather shed down the slope with extra water and diesel. Before all this, the shed was 3 minutes of downhill in trail shoes. Now it might as well have been a county over. I made a plan. I hung a bear bell on a line 50 yards out where I could swing it from the catwalk with the rope. I rigged 2 cans with pebbles on another line. If anything walked under, I'd hear. Late afternoon, a voice I knew came back. Maya again, but smaller, as if the radio had physically moved away from me while she talked. North Peak, if you're up, put a green sheet on the south rail. That means you have water. If it's red, you need it. We'll look. I had no sheets. I had a faded towel that used to be blue and shirts the color of work. I took my sleeping bag, which is more green than not, and draped it over the south rail. It flapped and flashed and felt like hope pinned to tin. Day 14 wore teeth. A band of infected circled at noon and stayed. They didn't press the ladder. They just lingered, arms slack, feet adjusting. One swayed in a regular way and touched its chin to its chest every third sway, the way my father used to when he dozed on a porch. It's wrong to look for old habits in the undead, but the brain hunts patterns even when you tell it not to. I spoke nothing into the recorder for a while because anything I said would come out like a plea. That night, the North Lookout's black tooth turned bright. Fire took the stump tower and then found a patch of cheatgrass and walked the slope. The glow washed the underside of the clouds like heat from an oven door. Something screamed up there, and then stopped in a place that made the hair on my forearms lift. I shut the hatch and sat with my back to it, and the climbing axe across my lap, and counted my breaths without noise. Somewhere in the middle of count 19, something thumped the hatch from below. Just one thump, measured, then silence. Day 15, I turned into a math teacher. I took out my map and traced the migration of the infected like weather fronts. When the wind came out of the southwest, they moved along the bottoms of the drawers. When it spun to the north, They climbed the open slopes and paused at the rocks where marmots sunned themselves. Sound turned them. Scent pulled them. Sight did less than you'd think. I started throwing little screws from the catwalk into the brush in different places to see how many heads turned and how fast. A quiet thud drew 2. A clatter drew 6. The big draws made echoes that fooled them. I could buy myself 3 seconds by bouncing a rock off a boulder. 3 seconds is a life when you're on a ladder. On day 16, the generator coughed and the light on the panel bobbed, and that was the world telling me to choose. Either sit in the dark or go down the hill and fetch diesel. The shed sits beyond a stand of aspen and a cut slope. There's a little drainage there with dark mud. The mud keeps tracks like a diary. That morning I watched the mud for an hour through the scope and counted only 2 fresh prints. Both were heel draggers. I rigged another line with the bell and tied it to my ankle and then to the rail, so if something tugged it, I'd feel it on my skin. I clipped the axe to my belt with paracord and took the rope, one end tied to the catwalk, and stepped down into the open. The air near the base of the tower smelled like hot creosote and old pennies. I set my boots light. I moved like I had a stack of plates on my head. The first 30 strides were fine. The mind makes up stories at that range. I told myself I was walking to the truck for forgotten groceries. I told myself I'd hear any trouble. At stride 31, a jay broke from the brush and flashed blue and screamed at me in pure anger. The drainage went quiet in a way that pushed on my eardrums. I crouched and watched the mud. Nothing. I crossed it with careful feet and came to the shed. The shed's padlock was old and the steel looked like bread crust. The bolt cutters bit with a little squeal that tasted like risk. I stopped at that sound and waited for the shelf in my chest to settle. Inside the shed, 2 jerry cans, whole, a crate with water, a tarp rolled up, a rain jacket, a box of nails. I took 1 can and the water and the jacket. I left the nails and the second can because greed makes noise and weight breaks speed. On the walk back, a shape rose behind the aspen, a man in a park t-shirt with the logo torn half off. His face had the wrong slack in it. He saw me or smelled me or both. He rotated in a slice, arms slow, and then his knees tipped forward and he came. When I ran, I didn't run like a hero. I ran like a kid who has snuck into a field and felt the farmer's eyes land on his back. I kept the jerry can tight against my hip to keep it from thumping. The man made 4 quick steps and stumbled on the drainage edge, then righted, then came again. Behind him, the trees lifted another shape like a bad dream rising to check the alarm clock. I hit the base of the tower and launched for the first intact rung, and my fingers bit, and my boots scrabbled at air, and the can tried to pull me backward. I hooked it with my forearm and climbed with forearms like I was hauling my own weight through molasses, and heard a hand slap wood below my feet. I did not look. I went up into the light and rolled onto the catwalk and jammed the axe handle through the hatch loop, and then I looked. 2 of them stood below, not looking up yet. One sniffed the rung I had touched. The other leaned against the post and left a shoulder mark the color of old cherries. I poured diesel with hands that shook the funnel. The generator caught and the panel smiled small green at me like a friend who hasn't slept in a while. I set water on the stove and didn't drink until I had forced myself to count to 80. Rules keep the mind from chewing itself. I wrote what happened in the log in clipped words, and then drew a little map of the shed and the drainage, and an X where the jay had screamed. I circled the X. Sometimes the forest tells you the truth with a bird, and if you don't mark it, you're dumb. Day 17. A voice came to the CB, not the scanner. Young, boyish. "Anyone on North Peak?" I answered. He said his name was Alex. He said he was at a cabin by a lake, the one I knew as Trout Mirror, the place where the trail boats sit stacked and upside down like turtles. He sounded tired and brave in the way kids are brave when no one has told them the bad news in the right tone yet. He asked if the road was safe. I told him the truth in pieces he could hold. "Not yet. Can you stay quiet and keep water?" He said yes, and yes. And then he asked if I was alone. I told him yes. He said, "Me too." And the way he said it put a knot in the air. We agreed to talk at dusk and dawn and to keep our words short. Alex kept me sane for 3 days. He whispered into the radio like the world had ears. He told me about the cabin's pantry and the pictures on the wall, and the canoe turned on its side under the porch. He asked me how to make a fishing line from sewing thread. I told him, and he caught a fish and described the flesh like he was reporting weather, careful and flat, like if he put any sugar on it he would cry. He told me the infected had come to the water's edge at night and then left before sunrise. He watched them press hands to the glass of the sliding door and leave prints like children. He didn't say children. I didn't ask. On day 21, I saw a helicopter. It skimmed the ridge, a fat green bird with a white cross, wobbling like the pilot had one eye closed. It dragged a long line below, and something swung on it in a way that said the hook had not been planned. The chopper passed over the valley and then tilted, and the tail rotor hiccuped. The swing on the line peaked. The pilot tried to shake the weight, and the machine did that dog with water thing, and then settled, and the tail clipped a tree, and that was that. The ridge took the impact with a short burst, and then the smoke stood up, dark and straight. I marked the spot out of habit, as if I had any way to reach it or use it or help. The infected pressed the tower that night in a slow, patient way that drained the word patience of every good thing. An arm slid into the gap around the hatch and fumbled like a blind man looking for his glasses. I set my boot heel on the arm through the wood and leaned hard enough to make the muscles in my leg shake. The hand withdrew. Another hand arrived. I sat on the hatch and hummed an old song to myself, in a voice so low it lived in my throat. The song isn't about courage. It's about making time pass. Day 22. The barrel was down to inches. Clouds rolled in at noon, big-bellied and grey, and for the first time since the world tilted, I grinned. I scrubbed the roof with the broom to get the pine needles off. Then I waited with the lid half open and the iodine ready. When the rain came, it came the way you want it, hard, cold, quick. I stood in it with my mouth open like a kid, and let the chill wipe the smell of diesel and fear out of my head. I filled both pots, the barrel, and my hat. I drank from my hat because there are still small joys even when the ground is full of dead men. The rain also bought me a window. Wet ground holds less scent. The infected drifted away from the tower midday. I threw a handful of screws into the tall grass to test my theory, and only one turned to look. I set up a decoy, my emergency radio playing low inside a coffee can on the far side of a boulder, timer set to click on in 20 minutes. Then I packed a small bag, iodine, rope, the small pry bar, a flare, 1 can of peaches, the lighter, 3 bandages. I told myself I would try for the second jerry can, and maybe the nails. The weather shed was a quiet box in wet woods. I made it there and back without seeing a single shuffle. That small victory felt like stealing candy from a sleeping guard. Day 23. Alex failed to call at dawn. I tried him at 10 past. Then at 20, then at noon. Nothing. At 2, I heard his voice, choked small, calling my name over and over like the word could be a rope. I answered calm, because panic is a spark, and you don't feed sparks. He said the sliding door had broken the night before. He said someone had crawled under the porch and stayed there all night, arms around a support post like hugging a tree. He said he had put the canoe against the broken door and stacked chairs. I told him to move to the bathroom where the tub sits and fill it. Keep a bucket for flushing. Make a spear from a mop handle and a knife. Tie it with wire, not tape. He repeated each instruction back to me like a soldier. That night I heard coyotes go off in the drainage below and then go silent as if someone had closed the door on a choir. I did not sleep. I watched the southern ridgeline crawl with little lights, not bright, not steady. The sort of lights you see when men walk with lighters cupped in hands. The wind carried the faintest of chants, not words, rhythm. The infected answered with the soft rattle of leaves as they turned together to face the sound. I realized then that the living had started to act like a herd too. 24 opened on a sunrise that looked like rust rubbed into cloud. I checked the north road with glass and saw an RV jammed sideways across the berm, and shapes moving inside it like hands under a blanket. I pulled back from the lens the way you pull back from a stove when you touch it by mistake. I called Alex at dawn, and he answered with a voice that had sand in it. He had made the spear. He had slept in the tub with a hat on because he said he felt safer with a hat. He asked if I thought the infected remembered names. He asked this in a small voice I hadn't heard yet. I told him I did not know, and that he should save the question for another day. By day 25, the infected had worn bare patches in the path at the base of the tower from circling. I watched a mouse try to cross one of those bare patches and stop dead still when an infected foot came down near it. The mouse paused, then sprinted for the shadow of the post and made it. I cheered inside my teeth. Then I took the flare and looked at it for a long time. A flare is a false sun. It calls things as sure as bells call church. I put it back. Day 26 was the day I had to change who I was. I had been the watcher, not the mover. I had been a man who names clouds and draws arrows by wind on paper. At noon, I took down the mirror used for signaling and tied it to the long pole we use for scanning. I taped a little wire to it so I could angle the light precise. I waited until an infected group had drifted to the western side of the clearing, and then I flicked a bright blip into the trees to the north. Heads turned. The group split. I moved the blip like you lead a dog with a biscuit. They followed in a loose, staggering trail into a pocket of brush. I kept the light on the pocket for 5 seconds and then let it die. The group stayed where the light had been as if it would return. I slipped down and fetched the second jerrycan while they waited. I made the ladder in 30 seconds flat. I could have cried. I paid for that trick at dusk. An infected who had not followed the light came to the base of the ladder and stood looking up with a stare that had the weight of a person behind it. He cocked his head and then tapped the wood in a measured rhythm, just like the first night. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, tap. I said his rhythm out loud like a fool, and the tapping stopped. He put his ear to the wood, and I put my ear to the hatch. I could hear breath through wood. Not fast, not slow. Human breath blown through a ruined instrument. We listened to each other like neighbors listening through an apartment wall. After a time that stretched too far, the breath moved away. 27 started with a drone, not a military one, a hobby drone ridden hard by someone desperate. It buzzed up the drainage like a fly that had been taught to scream. I stepped out onto the rail and watched it tilt and wobble. It had a paper note flapping under the belly, tied with string. I grabbed the old fishing net and braced and missed it twice and then got lucky. The drone hit the net and tangled, and I hauled it in like a trout on a line. The note said, "2 of us, out of food, hiker's lot, please help." The handwriting belonged to a woman, careful and steady. I looked where the hiker's lot sits and put glass on it and saw a sedan with doors open and a man leaning out the driver's seat window, motionless. A woman stood on the roof with a broom handle. She held her hand up like kids do when a helicopter goes by, not a wave, just the human urge to show a palm and say, "Look." I wrote a big "no" in the log and then crossed it out and wrote "maybe." I rigged a line with 2 cans and pebbles and ran it down the slope and around a stump and back so I could jerk it from the catwalk. The cans rattled on the far side of the clearing when I pulled. Infected turned toward the rattle. I pulled again, harder. A cluster drifted that way. I needed 3 minutes of quiet ground between me and the woman. I got one. Then a man came out of the trees near the lot, fast, moving like the story had skipped forward to a part I hadn't read. He jumped onto the sedan's hood and gripped it so hard the metal flexed, and then he slithered toward the woman on the roof. She jabbed him with the broom. He took the jab like it was rain. I had the flare in my hand already and lit it and threw it into the brush to my right. It popped and hissed and the air took color. The cluster of infected snapped to the sound, and the heat like dogs to a thrown steak. The man on the hood turned too. The woman jumped. She vanished off the far side of the car and then reappeared sprinting for the trees. I lost her in the understory. The flare died down to a mean glow and then to ash. The man on the hood slid back into the car. He did not climb out. Alex called at dusk and his voice carried that strained thinness a wire gets when it's pulled to the limit. He said he had heard my flare. Lake to tower is a mile. Sound rides pine needles farther than you'd think. He asked if I had thrown it for him. I said I had thrown it for someone. He said he wanted to move. I told him to hold one more day and to listen at dawn for 3 different bird calls. Jay, thrush, owl. If he heard all 3, it meant the woods felt safe enough to sing. He promised to call at dawn. He didn't call at dawn. On day 28, I sat with the mic in my lap and listened to empty. Wind came in gusts and made the guy lines play one high note. I spoke his name twice and then forced myself to shut up because speaking names does not conjure kids. The scanner spit a little traffic about a convoy on the river road and a quick engagement near the old cannery, and then went dead again. I wrote an address to a house in town I used to visit and crossed it out. My handwriting looked older in that light. At noon, the woman with the broom reappeared, not at the lot, at the edge of my clearing. She was smaller than she had looked on the roof. She had short hair stuck to her head and a blood-dark stripe down one arm that was not hers by the way she carried it. She raised both hands so wide I could see the raw spot on her left palm where the broom had chewed it. "Up there!" she called, voice flat like she'd run out of exclamation marks 2 days ago. "Please." I held my hand out, palm down, and made the universal slow sign. She nodded and sank to one knee and put her head down for one long breath. The infected were not in sight. A jay yelled far off, and the woman flinched. I lowered the rope ladder until it hung 2 rungs above the cuts I had made. She stood, stared at the space she had to jump, and then, without drama, stepped back and ran and jumped and caught the rope with a sound like hair ripping out. She fought the swing like a sailor and made the wood, and then the steel, and then the catwalk. I hauled the ladder up after her while she lay with her face flat to the wood. The smell that comes off a desperate human is not pretty. It is honest. I gave her water and half a can of peaches because peaches tell a person you consider them alive. She said her name was Lila. She had been in the sedan with her husband when a man stepped out in front of them, covered in blood at the bend, and her husband stopped because he was good, and the line of good acts hooked itself through his mouth and pulled him out of safety. She said the men from the trees took the car and food and tried to take her, but she hit one with the broom, and in the chaos her husband crawled under the car and didn't come back out. The way she said crawled made me see the laces of his shoes snag on something sharp and stay snagged forever. She did not cry. She sipped the peach juice like medicine. I showed Lila the map. I showed her where Trout Mirror sat, and where the tower was, and where the road ran like a stitched line through the hills. She asked about Alex without me saying his name. She said she had heard a kid on the radio days before, and had kept the drone battery for that reason, in case a signal needed a courier. I didn't tell her I had used the flare on her behalf and not his. You don't subtract mercy with facts. We agreed that at dawn on day 29, we would try to reach the lake. We would use the ridge shadow and the wet ground, and we would carry only what would not kill us if we had to drop it. Lila had a small knife and the kind of set jaw that tends to win. The night walked around us. Infected came twice and tapped the ladder once and then drifted away like sleepwalkers pulled by tide. Lila dozed against the wall. I sat with my back pressed to the hatch, listening to the timber of the world and deciding what parts of myself to leave behind. At some point I stood and unwound the old roll of flagging tape and tied a length to the rail. It moved in the night breeze, a little, and that was enough to make an infected at the base look up and stare for a full minute. You could feel the thinking or the echo of thinking. How much of a man sits in the meat of a face after the spark goes? I pushed the thought away like a fly. We stepped off the tower at grey light. The forest smelled rinsed from dew. A jay laughed at us because a jay can't help it. I made a face at it and it shut up, which felt like a gift. We moved through the aspen stand one careful foot, then another, weight low, eyes working ahead and behind. My breath sat where it belonged. Lila's steps made a small hiss in the grass, and she made the knife disappear into her sleeve when she needed her hand. No infected in sight, but that means little. The woods hold more corners than houses. At the little drainage we froze, fresh prints, toes dug in deep, heels dragging. 2 sets, one headed toward the lake, one headed toward my tower. I wanted to laugh. The world ballots in secret. I tapped Lila's elbow and pointed at the lakeward prints and she nodded. We shadowed them, but on the high side, so we could drop or climb depending on what came. Down near the cattails by the lake, a heron lifted slow and heavy and flapped off like a piece of tapestry. I put the glass on the cabin and saw the sliding door caved inward, the canoe wedged. No movement inside, but a pile of blankets in the tub room window and a small sign taped to the glass. calling at dawn. My mouth made a shape without sound. We reached the porch on knees and elbows, quiet as we knew how, and stayed there a long minute to let the place talk to us. A smell of old fish and soap and iron, a cup on the floor near the couch. I cupped my hands and called in a voice barely taller than a whisper, "Alex." Silence. I tried again, softer. Something shifted in the bathroom, not the heavy kind of movement an adult makes. I stepped to the door and tapped the frame with 2 knuckles in a rhythm I had used on the radio. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The blanket moved. A boy's face appeared at the edge of it, hair glued to his forehead, eyes bright and red-rimmed. He didn't smile. He checked me like a wary old man might, and then he said, "Do you have water?" I handed the bottle and watched him drink with small sips like he'd been taught. Lila stood behind me with the knife hidden and watched the windows. We can be kind and guarded at once. We got Alex out from the tub with a steady talk of steps and did not touch him until he asked for a hand, because touching a scared person without warning is a good way to ruin a day. He carried his spear. He had tied the blade to the mop handle with twine and wire exactly as told. He wore the hat. He looked at Lila and then at me and then at the lake and said, "We can't stay here." He was right. The broken door ate the whole plan. The canoe option died the minute the infected learned the deck and the glass. We had to move to the tower or past it to the old service road. I wanted the tower. Lila wanted the road. Alex wanted neither. We argued quiet, heads close, breath small. I gave in to the road because supplies without a path are a grave with shelves. We moved along the lake edge in the reeds to keep our scent near water. It helped. I do not know how much. I know the infected who tested the cabin have noses like old hound dogs, and the water smelled like fish and rot and sun-warmed algae, and our sweat hid in that stew. We cut up the slope to the road and found it rutted, a mess of clay and gravel. On the shoulder we found a pack, children's stickers on it. Inside, 2 granola bars, a toy car, a folded piece of paper with a list written in pencil. Milk, bread, batteries. The list of a world that had not planned for this morning. I took the batteries and left the toy car and felt like a thief and a priest at once. Halfway to the switchback above my tower, we heard the herd. Not huge, enough. The sound is unmistakable once you learn it. Feet that don't land right, cloth on brush. The low throat noise some make, like clearing a cough they never finish. We dropped into the ditch and flattened and left the spear standing upright in the grass because it looked like a reed. The group passed above us. 6, then 8, then 12. One wore a backpack with a solar lantern clipped to it. The lantern blinked with each step like a heartbeat in plastic. A woman in the group had one shoe on and one off, and the shoeless foot bled a dark line that the dust soaked up and refused to show. Alex didn't move. The kid knew how to be a stone. Lila's hand lay on the dirt. I could see the broom blister, raw and shiny, and the streak of someone else's life on her forearm. I counted to 60 twice, and then rose and looked both ways. Clear, we ran. My tower came into view like a place out of a postcard someone mailed from a parallel world. Sun on the roof, flagging tape on the rail. The ladder looked ordinary, an everyday tongue of wood. The clearing below was empty. That meant it was not. Clearings are like smiles, made to hide teeth. I set Alex on the rope and told him to wait for my signal, then to jump and climb without stopping, to ignore the swing, to keep hands high, to not look down. I swung the ladder in. He jumped and caught like a natural. Arms learned on tree branches and playground bars, no ropes. He climbed smooth. Lila came next. She shook once on the swing and then set legs and moved. When her boot hit the hatch, I looked back and saw the first infected in the brush, watching with that still deer stand stare. We hauled the ladder and shut the hatch. The infected stepped into the clearing and stood where we had stood, eyes on the rail where the tape moved. I fed the kid a thin stew of canned beans and water, and watched his mouth turn up at the taste like I'd handed him steak. Lila sat with her back to the wall and ran her thumb along the knife handle like she was memorizing it. We took turns with the glasses and watched the group collect. 15, 20, more. They didn't test the ladder right away. They waited. They had learned something, and I did not want to know what. At sunset, when the swallows came out for the evening feeding, a sound rose from the trees, a single human voice, male, repeating 2 words like prayer or command, "Come home." It pulsed on the air like a heartbeat you could hear. The infected snapped heads to the sound and moved. The pack drifted away toward the voice, the way wheat leans in a steady wind. I put my forehead on the wood and spoke, not to God, but to the part of myself that needed to hear, and said, "We leave tomorrow." Day 30 started with a list. Pack the small, burn the rest. Mark the map for someone who might come after. I wrote in big letters on the wall in pencil, "Water east, shed south, kids safe on roof tonight." I don't know if any of that would be true by the time another human read it, but it felt like setting out breadcrumbs. I drained the barrel into 2 jugs and capped them. I filled 3 bottles and made Alex carry one. I handed Lila the flare and kept the mirror. We built a little pyre of things that would do more good as a magnet than a suitcase. Paper, spare chair, tarp I hated. We waited until the sun lifted enough to punch light through the trees. The infected like shade. They aren't allergic to sun, but they move less in full glare. I hung the decoy radio in the coffee can out over the brush with the line and set the timer, and then doused the floor with the last of the bad fuel I had been saving for a job like this. I got Alex and Lila on the rope and told them to lower themselves the first few feet and then drop. The catwalk felt like the deck of a ship that had reached harbor at last. I lit a match on my thumbnail like my father taught me, and it flared, and I touched it to the fuel-soaked rag and watched the first lick find the wood. The tower took flame with a slow, reluctant tone, like a stubborn stove. We moved. The radio in the brush clicked on and played a chirpy weather report from last year. The infected turned toward it with a neat hunger and drifted. We slid through the aspen and cut downhill to the old service road and took the bend low and fast. Behind us, the tower's flame woke up and found dry patches, and then the whole thing drew breath. The smoke spread a flat hand over the clearing, and the infected forgot us entirely. A few passed the new heat and made purposeful lines toward it, as if the past lived in their bones. Campfires, stoves, summer grills. Humans and flame have a contract even when the contract is broken. At the bend, your body wants to look back. I did. The tower I had loved and cursed stood wrapped in a warm orange scarf, and the flagging tape did a little dance as it burned to nothing. The roof popped with a sound like knuckles. The ladder smoked, and then went black, and then slumped. For a second, I hated what I had done, as if I had abandoned a friend. Then a face moved at the base of the tower like a cinder against snow, and I stopped hating and kept walking. The road led us east toward the river where a footbridge still spans a narrow cut. We made the bridge by noon, hiding twice when we heard groups moving in the timber. One group of living men crossed above us on the slope, 5 in a line, rifles at low ready, eyes like burned holes. They did not see us, or pretended not to. Lila lowered her gaze because she knew men sometimes turn ugly when they see a woman first. Alex studied the soles of his shoes and did not speak. I watched and counted rifles, and noted that one man had a bandage under his shirt at the belly, and that he walked bent and careful. Men who will move with a wound like that have a mission or a bad leader. At the river, we watered and refilled and took the time to rinse faces. I handed Alex the mirror and showed him how to throw light down the canyon without staring at the flash. He smiled. Not big, enough to make his cheek curl. He told me a joke about a trout that wasn't funny, and then looked embarrassed. I laughed anyway. A laugh is food. Lila put the knife away and picked up a smooth river rock and put it in her pocket, and I asked why. She said it felt like a promise you can carry. I did not argue with the poetry of that because she had earned the right to use whatever kept the mind from cracking. We followed the service road until it met the old logging route, a gentle shelf through second growth. I marked places I'll remember until I die. A perfect ewe of bear scat with berries in it, a muffler in the brush, an old sign half rotten that once said Scenic Overlook and now read COVR. The world kept throwing punchlines with no joke. Mid-afternoon, The sky drew thin and white, and wind came down the canyon with the smell of burned tower and sap. I put my hand on Alex's shoulder once, just once, and he didn't shake it off. He kept the spear at an angle that said he would use it on anything that came for us. Late in the day, we topped the last rise before the ranger station basin and saw it. A place made of low buildings and flagpoles and trucks, all still and wrong. Windows gone, doors open like missing teeth. A flag hung wrapped around its pole like a shirt around a man who has lost weight. I glued the binoculars to my eyes until the rims cut little grooves in the skin and saw the thing that made me drop my hands. The radio mast still stood. The panels at the base were intact. The small humming shape of a generator sat beside it, quiet but whole. If we could reach that mast, we could shout to the world, or whatever is left of it. The smile that tried to come died before it got born. Between us and the station lay a tangle. Cars, fences, men built into a barricade and then abandoned without ceremony. You could not pass it in daylight without becoming the subject of a seminar you do not want to attend. We camped in a hollow above a dry creek bed, 30 minutes short of the station. No fire, cold food, quiet water. I showed Alex how to hang the food bag on a line between two trunks, and he did it without spilling a crumb. Lila and I took turns with the glass. The wind shifted 3 times and brought with it the talk of the city far south. Distant horns, a siren that rose and fell and then cut, and the steady hum that never quite dies. That hum is still my favorite sound. It means some part of the old map is still printing. I thought again about the note I'd carved into the frame beside the hatch. The last thing I left behind. Water east, fuel in shed, kids survived the roof. No signature, no instructions. Just a message to whoever might make it up there next, if anyone ever does. Maybe a traveler finds it during a quiet stretch between the bad days, reads it by flashlight, and follows the hints like trail markers. Maybe it helps. Or maybe the tower's already been taken by wind, rot, or fire. Wood warps, screws rust. If no one comes, that note will fade until it's part of the grain. That's all right. Not everything we do is meant to last. Some things just have to be true for a while. We're not trying to save the world. We're not trying to reach safety, or broadcast a cure, or find some last pocket of civilization. That kind of thinking gets people killed. All we're doing now is moving east toward a mast that still stands, hoping the generator still has something left in it. If the lines are good and the tower isn't stripped out, maybe we can reach someone. Maybe not. I'm not expecting voices on the other end. Just the static would be enough. Static means there's still a signal, even if no one's talking. I've worked towers long enough to understand what silence really means. Lila's resting now, wrapped in the sleeping bag she rescued from the ashes of someone else's plan. She hasn't said much since last night, but she's sharper than she lets on. The knife's always near her hand, and she's got that rock from the river tucked into the side pouch of her pack, like it's something sacred. She doesn't believe in luck, but she believes in rituals. Alex is curled up beside the stove, still holding the makeshift spear he made back at the cabin. The mop handle's cracked and held together with wire. It probably wouldn't stop much now, but he won't let it go. I understand. Some things you hold on to even after they stop working, because letting go would mean the fear won. I'll teach him what I know. How to read a map without a compass. How to use a mirror to call for help without making yourself a target. How to tell the difference between movement that's alive and movement that's desperate. I'll show him the old tricks, the bell traps, the pebble cans, the way sound carries in a canyon depending on the wind. It's not much, but it's what I've got left. Lila will handle the rest. She's better at the hard conversations. She knows how to say no when it matters, and she doesn't flinch when something has to be put down. That's a strength I don't always have. I used to think being a lookout meant staying still, that my job was to sit at the top of a tower and report what I saw while other people made the decisions. I know better now. I don't need elevation to see clearly. I don't need a tower to be a lookout. I still watch. I still listen. I still keep record. I just do it on the move now. Every mile we cover is another entry in the ledger, another line that says we kept going even when we didn't have a reason to. If someone's listening, if you're still out there, Here's what I can tell you. The infected, whatever's driving them, it isn't hate or hunger. It's pattern. They follow noise, scent, light, motion. But they don't think. Not really. They don't remember. They don't reason. That's our edge, if we still have one. The living, on the other hand, we move for all the wrong reasons. Guilt, hope, orders, instinct, hunger. Sometimes we run toward what we should be running from, just because it reminds us of the past. That's the trap. That's how people die, with their keys still in their hand and the front door wide open. The best advice I can give is this. Keep your perimeter simple. Keep your gear light. Trust your ears more than your eyes. Don't answer voices at night unless you know where they're coming from. Keep the lowest ladder rung cut or raised. Don't sleep near windows. And if you ever find yourself up high and alone, never wave to strangers in the distance. They wave back too late, or not at all. Morning's almost here. The trees are still black shapes against the sky, but the horizon's bleeding pale. The fog's low in the basin, hugging the creek bed like a secret. The radio mast is still standing. We'll make for it at first light. Not because we think there's help, but because it's the next thing, the next place to try. That's what survival is now. Just stacking necks until you run out of road. Before we go, I'm leaving this page tucked under the stove with the rest of the logbooks. If someone finds the tower and it's still standing, they'll see where we went and when. Maybe that'll help them stay alive another day. Maybe it won't. Doesn't matter really. Not everything has to matter forever. Sometimes it just has to be real once. The kid's awake. Lila's tying her boots. The light's here. We're moving east. Not because we're heroes. Not because we're trying to save anything. Just because the fire didn't take us, and the road didn't end, and our legs still work. That's enough. That has to be enough. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.